And if I told you that the universe has been trying to warn you all the time, but you just ignore it? Have you noticed how, in certain relationships, does it all start to go wrong? Small signs appear, discussions for no reason, constant anxiety, an inexplicable feeling that something is not right. But we insist, as if love needed to be a war. But the universe doesn't work like that. He gives warnings, creates obstacles, and if you don't listen, he teaches you in the worst way. The problem is that we were trained to resist. We learn that love is struggle, that giving up is failure, that everything that is worth requiring suffering. But what if this is just a myth that keeps us stuck to relationships that no longer make sense? Destiny does not let anything go unnoticed. If a relationship houses you more than strengthens you, it may not be love, maybe it's just a disguised attachment. And the price of ignoring these signs can be high. Many only realize when they have lost years, energy, and even their own identity. But what if there was a way of understanding these signs before the worst happened? To see what the universe is trying to show you. If you feel that something in your relationship does not fit, this is the time to open your eyes, because when fate speaks, it is better to hear. We don't always realize, but the universe talks to us all the time. He whispers in times of intuition, screams through anxiety, and sometimes gives us a push we would prefer to avoid. In a relationship, these warnings come like that uncomfortable feeling in the chest, as if something was misaligned. It can be a subtle change in energy between two people, inexplicable tiredness, or even recurring dreams that seem to carry a message. The problem is that we often ignore these signs because we want to believe that we are on the right track, even when it seems otherwise. And then the small alerts begin. Conversations that once flowed easily now have seen exhaustive debates, plans that seemed promising begin to collapse without explanation, and a strange sense of resistance takes over. It is no coincidence. When a relationship is not to be, the universe finds ways to show us this, either through external events or our own emotional well-being. Who has never felt a tightness in the chest beside someone, for no apparent reason? This is not paranoia, it is perception. If we look well, these signs do not appear out of nowhere. Sometimes they manifest themselves as a sequence of uncomfortable coincidences, messages that do not arrive, repeatedly unmarked meetings, situations that create friction for no apparent reason. The universe is subtle but persistent. He tests our resistance, gives us a chance of seeing what is before the eyes. What only seems like a detail can actually be a great warning that something is not right. And if we still insist on ignoring, the signs intensify. Tiredness increases, inner peace disappears, and suddenly the person who should bring love and security becomes a source of restlessness. This is where many people ask themselves, is it a thing in my head or is fate trying to tell me something? But before answering, we must understand what happens when we do not hear these warnings. When a relationship does not flow naturally, the universe is not content just to send small signs, it begins to lift barriers. Plans begin to beyond, the previously light conversations become endless discussions, and even the energy of the environment seems to regret. Have you noticed how sometimes everything seems to go wrong for no reason? The messages are not enough, the meetings are cancelled, the tune simply disappears. This is not just bad luck, it is a block. An invisible resistance that manifests itself in subtle but constant forms. And the more we try to force something that should not be, the more the obstacles appear. Relationships that require disproportionate effort to rarely exist are sustainable. Of course, every couple faces challenges, but there is a difference between overcoming difficulties together and fighting their own destination. When there is true love, difficulties unite, when there is only resistance, they destroy. That's where the big question arises, does love need to be that hard? Or are we confusing attachment with persistence? Blocks can arise in different ways, a sudden change in behavior, frequent mismatches, even external issues, such as work or distance, seem to arise out of nowhere to prevent the advancement of the relationship. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when the challenges accumulate and the relationship becomes more about effort than on connection, it is a sign that something is not aligned. The universe acts not to punish, but to protect. After all, how many times do we ignore obstacles just to regret later? And the more we insist, the more exhausting everything becomes. Loss of emotional energy, mental exhaustion, and the feeling of always swimming against the current are direct consequences of ignoring these blocks. But why do so many people resist releasing something that clearly doesn't flow? Perhaps because the idea that true love must be difficult was romanticized for so long that we forget an essential detail: real love does not imprison, it frees it. But are we willing to see this difference? There is a dangerous trap in which many people fall: confuse love with resistance. They believe that the harder a relationship, the more significant it should be. But is it really? Love should not be a constant battle. If you are with someone requires exhaustive effort, where each day it seems like proof of emotional resistance, it may not be love, but attachment. The idea that everything worthwhile requires sacrifice may even make sense in some areas of life, but when we talk about relationships, this thought can be a trap. It is common to hear phrases like, "If it was easy, anyone would have," or "True love requires struggle." But the truth is that this fight is often not against the world, it is against ourselves. Against the fear of being alone, against the idea of failure, against the belief that if we give up, we will be throwing out something valuable. But what is more valuable? The relationship itself or our inner peace? If the relationship has become a daily battle, where each advance requires a superhuman effort, perhaps it is time to question whether this is love or just fear of letting go. True love does not live with resistance, but of fluidity. When two people are aligned, the challenges exist, yes, but they are surpassed naturally, without one of the parts having to cancel themselves completely. If the relationship requires that someone constantly sacrifice their self-esteem, their dreams, and even their vital energy, this is not love, it is prison. And the worst is that many only realize this when they have already lost important parts of themselves. Who has never heard stories of people who only regained happiness after a separation that seemed to avoid at all costs? But why do we insist? Because we were taught to romanticize suffering. Movies, songs, and books reinforce the idea that great love stories are marked by almost impossible obstacles. But this is fiction. In real life, healthy love is not built on resistance, but on compatibility, respect, and mutual growth. The problem is that we often only realize it too late, and the universe never tires of giving us proof of it. But what happens when we ignore all these signs? Ignoring the signs of the universe is like covering the ears while someone shouts, "Be careful," by our side. At first, the alerts are subtle: a feeling of tiredness, small frustrations, that intuition that something is not right. But if we insist on continuing, the warnings are becoming increasingly clear, until they are impossible to ignore. When we do not hear, the universe teaches us the hardest way, through pain. Unexpected betrayals, overwhelming crises, emotional exhaustion, and even physical diseases become consequences of stubborn resistance. And it's not an exaggeration. How many people, when leaving a toxic relationship, realize that their mental and physical health were deteriorated? Insomnia, anxiety, inexplicable pain, all this can be a reflection of a relationship that is no longer good. The body feels before the mind accepts. It's like trying to hold a rope that burns your hands: the longer we hold, the more it hurts. But drop seems scary, so we insist, until the destination itself makes the decision for us. When signs are ignored too long, the consequences can be devastating. The person can be involved in a cycle of betrayal, where each new disappointment seems worse than the previous one. Or, the relationship drags on even over nothing but wear and frustration. Some only awaken after an irreversible loss, such as a painful rupture or a traumatic event. And the most curious? When they finally get out of the situation, they wonder why they took so long to see the obvious. But does it need to reach this point? Is it necessary to wait for the worst to finally make a decision? The universe always offers two ways, learning by understanding or suffering. The choice is in the hands of those who live the experience. And when we finally understand that clinging can cost us much more than we imagine, a new reflection arises. What is the true price of staying where we should not be? Carting something that should have already been left behind has a high cost. At first, we try to ignore small losses, a little of our inner peace, a piece of self-esteem, that energy that seems to be exhausted faster than before. But gradually we realize that they are not just fragments that are being taken, we are losing ourselves completely. How many people no longer looked in the mirror after years in a relationship and wondered, who did I become? This happens when we insist on something that no longer belongs to us. Attachment makes us accept crumbs, normalize pain and justify the unjustifiable. We tell ourselves that it is just a phase, that everything will improve, that every relationship has ups and downs. But is there love where there is more sadness than joy? Can a relationship that requires sacrifices of our happiness still be called love? When we are for fear of losing, we are already losing much more than we imagine. We are wasting time, energy, and opportunities that could lead us to something truly aligned with who we are. And the price only increases. The relationship that should bring security begins to generate anxiety. What should be companionship becomes betrayal, sometimes not necessarily a physical betrayal, but a betrayal of our essence, our dreams, and what we know, deep down, that we deserve. And when we finally decided to let go, we realized the weight we carried unnecessarily. Relief comes as a wave, bringing back peace that, for so long, seemed unreachable. But it is not always easy to take this step. The fear of loss holds us, as if dropping it was a failure. The truth, however, is that the true defeat is to remain where we are not valued. And when we finally have the courage to let go, something amazing happens. The space that was once busy for what was no longer served to be filled with something new. But are we ready to open this space? To release is not to lose, it is to break free. Many times we are afraid to let go because we believe we are giving up something valuable. But what if, in fact, we are just making room for what really deserves to be in our lives? When we finally detach from a relationship that no longer adds to us, we feel almost immediate relief. It's like taking a backpack full of back stones and realizing how much she weighed. But to reach this point, it takes courage, the courage to trust destiny and the universe. And then something magical happens. The energy that was once consumed by suffering begins to be redirected for personal growth. The previously shaken self-esteem reconstructs itself. Intuition, once muffled by fear, again guide our choices. Gradually, we realize that that relationship that bound us so much was not the last chance of happiness, but an obstacle that prevented us from seeing much greater possibilities. After all, how can something new to come in if we are holding the old man so strongly? Many people are afraid of the emptiness that comes after a separation, but this emptiness is actually an invitation to transformation. He teaches us that inner peace is worth more than any relationship that causes us pain. That the freedom to be who we are, without fear, is priceless. And that when we stop fighting what is not for us, the universe conspires in our favor. After all, how many stories have we heard of people who found true love after finally released what no longer made sense? What seemed impossible becomes reality, resistance dissolves, the blockages disappear, and what once seemed like an end reveals itself as a fresh start. The universe rewards those who have the courage to move on. But are we ready to receive these rewards? Now that you know how the universe gives us signs when something is not right, the question is, will you keep ignoring or finally will act? How many times have you felt that intuition, that internal warning, and yet insisted? And what happened next? Was it worth all the wear, all anxiety, all the resistance? Or, deep down, did you know the answer, but were you afraid to face the truth? Life always gives us two options, learning by understanding or learning by pain. What do you choose? Because one thing is certain, the universe never tires of trying to open your eyes. If something is draining you, if your inner peace is at stake, if everything seems to be harder than it should, maybe it's time to release. But only you can make that decision. Are you ready to stop resisting and finally let go? If this content made sense to you, leave your comment below and tell me, what was the biggest sign the universe has ever given you about a relationship? I want to know your experience. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications to continue receiving more insights like this. Your transformation can start now, you just want to see.